So, hi everyone. This is Patrick Cody, sitting in for Tom Ayers from the Vermont Standard, who's off this week, and we don't miss a beat here. So we're back with State Representative Charlie Kimbell. Hi, Charlie. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Patrick. Good to be with you this morning.
Thank you. And Charlie has graciously agreed to joining us weekly to provide an update throughout the legislative session, both from just in general, state legislative progress, as well as specifically about his the House Ways and Means Committee, in which he's a ranking member. So, hello again, Charlie. And I understand it's been yet again another busy week under the dome. Last time we had you, we were talking about the foundation formula, the proposed um, monumental changes to the state education funding, and I know that there's been a lot. I've listened into a couple of your committee meetings from last week, and there's still a lot unfolding. Can you just, in a nutshell, tell us what the House Ways and Means Committee focuses on? I know it's got something to do with taxes, but beyond that, what is your purview?
Yeah, thanks for that. So the Ways and Means Committee really is charged with generating revenues to support the activities of state government. So it's taxes and fees. So that's how do we raise enough money from the various different programs to support what other committees in the legislature, the appropriations, then spend. So we're on the how do you get the money side, and then the other committees are on how do you spend the money side. So generally, the Ways and Means Committee it reacts to what the needs are of the legislature or the state and saying we need to fund these programs, and then we have to come up with a way to actually fund them. You know, that's mostly true. The part that isn't true is that 40% of the funding, 36 to 40% of the funding that the state spends comes from the federal government. So then we have to figure out a way to raise the rest. And that includes everything from what is the sales tax, what's the income tax, what is the property transfer tax, all those things that have tax in it or a fee, the Ways and Means Committee looks at. So
And I know, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, it's very important, obviously, because you're trying to figure out a way to have a fair and equitable tax system. And Vermont really prides itself on having a very progressive tax system in which those who earn more can afford to pay more. It's different. Some people look at what a flat tax is system, so that everybody pays the same percentage of their income. Well, that's an interesting part. Or everybody pays the same amount. So there's different philosophies. One's regressive, one's progressive. But generally, Vermont tries to be as progressive as possible and making sure that the people that can't afford to pay taxes then do not have the obligation to pay.
And we understand, I mean, we're hearing there's a lot of rhetoric out there about how heavily tax burdened we are in Vermont. And I understand that there are some tax relief proposals being looked at in your committee. Do you want to maybe highlight some of those? And
Sure. I mean, let's talk about it. Vermont is heavily taxed. I mean, if you look at all the taxes we pay, a combination of sales tax, property tax, income tax, and if you look at all that, so the burden is fairly high. What most people look at is the highest marginal tax rate, which is 8.75%. So how does that compare to other states? Well, in reality, most people, hardly anybody pays 8.75%. And that's really the amount of the tax that is an income that's above, I think, $275,000. And under that, in the different tax brackets, you know, you get to the point of which on the next dollar amount, you're going to earn or have to pay a higher percentage. So Vermont's average tax rate, I believe, is about 3.8% of somebody's income. So that's what the average is, even though that top marginal tax rate is high. But we look at other things to see how can we give more tax relief. There's a number of exemptions from income tax. And one of those is a Social Security exemption. So how much of somebody's Social Security income is exempt from income taxes in the state of Vermont. And Vermont has stands out a little bit as saying it is taxable. Other states have 100% exempted Social Security income from being taxed at the state level. Vermont has said, yeah, if you earn less than $65,000 as a married couple, then you will not have to pay any tax on your Social Security either. But if you earn more than that, then you're going to have to pay taxes on it. One of the proposals that the governor's made is to increase those exemptions by $5,000 per year for people who are earning or receiving Social Security income. And that seems like a inflation adjusted, reasonable amount to do. And I think the legislature will approve that this year. And I think that adds about $2 million in terms of exemptions to what Vermonters are, now exempt from. So that's one is exemptions. A second one is what kind of refundable credits do we do? One is the child tax credit. Right now, if you have a child who is under 5 years old, then you, subject to income limitations, then you are able to get a tax credit of $1,000 per child. And that, if 5 years old, the proposal from the governor is to increase that to children that are 6 years old. Well, this is an increase, obviously, of the pool of children that are eligible for it. And this makes a lot of sense. This gives credits to those people that are most in need with incomes that are low, and you've got really high expenses with kids that are below 5 or 6 years old, and really usually impacts the parents' ability to earn money. So this, from a philosophical standpoint, makes sense. And I think the limits are if you're earning under $125,000 as a household, then you get to deduct 100% of that $1,000 per child, and then it fades out until the total income is $175,000, and then anybody above that doesn't get any kind of credit at all. So that's the one piece. And the third that I was just going to mention to you is the earned income tax credit. And there's two things. One is for those with children and those without children. And for those without children, this is a federal program, earned income tax credit, also a refundable credit, that if you earn as a household less than $26,000 and you have no children, then you earn at a federal level an earned income tax credit. Well, until now, Vermont has also mirrored that with a 38% of whatever the federal amount is. And this year, the governor's proposed, and I think there's general acceptance, to increase it to 100% of what that federal level is. So that's a big increase from 38% to 100%. But the maximum credit is, I think, like $649, something like that. So it's not a big amount, but that is going to add, I think, is $3 million in additional refundable tax credits into what Vermont is experiencing. So it allows people who most need it the ability to keep more money in their pocket. So it's a good way to address poverty or and just people who are struggling. They need extra help.
And are all of these proposals part of one large bill, or are they being taken up individually?
Yeah, so it was all part of the governor's overall program, and we've received we've received statutory language and proposals for it. So it'll take a separate proposal and a tax proposal, and the committee is working on that. So those are anything that really are not revenue neutral, because these are definitely expenses, what we call tax expenditures, because it's foregone revenue in some ways. So that is in a separate bill, and a bill that we have that's moving through the House Committee on Ways and Means. So we'll be moving that out in the next couple of weeks. Yeah.
And so that's by like crossover.
We actually have a special dispensation for money committees. We
Oh,
get to go the week after crossover, so it's March 21st. We have to push it out. And something interesting about the legislative session, both the House and the Senate have agreed to extend the legislative session to deal with these huge proposals for education transformation. So it looks like we'll be extending the session into June, usually ends sometime in mid-May. Don't know exactly when it's going to end. It really depends on how fast we can do the rest of the work, but there's a lot to be done.
so by doing that, if you're extending the session, does that also extend the date of the crossover, the time at which bills need to?
Not technically, except for the ones that are really education related. We've got something that happened last week is that we've been the legislature's been waiting for specific language, specific proposals from the governor as to this education transformation plan, and we just haven't had it. We haven't received the wording, and we can't do anything unless we have wording for it. And so last week, the education committee said, you know what, we can't wait any longer. So on Wednesday afternoon, they said, here are the proposals we think we can live with right now that are maybe part of the governor's plan and maybe part of what we think we can actually do. And so we're always anticipating that we're going to get language from the governor. That'll probably happen this week. And then we'll be able to react to both what the specific wording is, but also incorporate the wording of the education committee's advance. So we're moving forward. It's not as seamless as it could have been if we had had the wording, say, in January, but we're trying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And just generally in the legislature, I mean, obviously after this last election, there's a little bit of the different power dynamic
Yeah.
now, and I just wonder how that has influenced some of the work on the committee as well as just in the General Assembly in terms of like working together and getting things done.
Yeah, and that's really fair. I think there's two things. One is there's a lot more collaboration between the different parties in the legislature this year, from a part of realization that there is not a veto-proof majority, that we have to make sure that everybody's okay. There's enough people supporting an initiative to be able to move forward, and both in the Senate and in the House. So there's that. There's a spirit of cooperation. And there was another part that I was going to bring up too. So the other thing is that we are all aware of the legislative calendar and that we're running out of time. We're more than 6 weeks in at this point, which is generally a third of the legislative session. And we still have a lot of work to get done. And so we're all feeling that pressure, and we want to make sure that we don't waste time, and we want to bring those important things to the fore, which means that some stuff is just going to sit on the sidelines. So those key parts of legislation that we have to move forward this year, we're going to move those forward. Where there are other things that, in a different session, they might have been, really the most important, but this session, they're not being taken up. Yeah.
And what about, is there anything else that's hot and on your radar that you wanted to mention before we wrap up?
Well, there's large proposals, and I'm not informed enough on them specifically. But just to touch base on it, there's a lot of proposals made by the governor and by some other bills to roll back part or all of the Global Warming Solutions Act that was passed a couple of years ago. And as you know, there was a proposal to institute a clean heat standard that was subject to review by the Public Utilities Commission, and they came out with their review of it in January, and they said, hey, as you originally conceived of it, it's not going to work, so we're not recommending that you move forward with this credit system. And so that's still, there are people that are committed to seeing how we can move to better, cleaner heat. But as it was proposed, that probably isn't going anywhere. But there is still this commitment to figure out, well, if not that, then what? So there's still those considerations as to doing that. The governor has some interesting ideas about what he wants to do with rolling back some of the provisions of the Global Warming Solutions Act. So let's talk about that. The biggest one, of course, is the proposal is to remove the ability of the private right of action, which basically is giving organizations or persons the ability to sue the state government if they haven't met the climate goals, and to force the state to have a realistic plan to put in place to achieve those climate goals. And the goals are basically around greenhouse gas emission reductions. So those are big topics, and we're going to be talking about those. And the two sides are, one saying, hey, why would we invite this kind of lawsuit if we're not able to meet our expectations? And the second is, without accountability, why would the government ever do anything? So we're trying to balance those two because they're both true. But how committed is the state and how committed is the legislature to trying to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions? And that's really central to this whole question. So that's what we're trying to figure out.
And it was looking like some of those deadlines at least weren't going to be met.
Yeah, the 2025 deadline looks like that's doable. 2030 looks like a huge stretch.
Mhm.
Probably not going to be able to make that. And then there's always a question about whose data is being used. Is it the right data? Does this show that we're meeting the expectations? Is it not meeting the expectations? So there's that debate as well. And we have to show that we're actually making progress. And with the rollback at the federal level of different funding for different EV incentives and that kind of stuff, which is either real or anticipated, you got to operate in the reality of what we're going to be getting from assistance from the federal government. So that's we have to deal with that.
On a final note, we've got town meeting coming up, under a week. Well, a week anyway. It depends on what town you live in, but I know
Yeah.
I'll be out covering a couple of them anyway. And I assume you'll be making an appearance at your own in Woodstock, and will we see you out at the others in Plymouth and Reading?
Absolutely. I was talking to the select board member down in Reading today, and he was expressing his kind of regret that it's not the actual in-person voting. There's an informational session that is on Saturday, and then the voting is by Australian ballot on Tuesday. And anybody that's been around town meetings long enough really loves to have that repartee, that discussion, the community gathering, getting together, and it's hard when you don't have that. And so I think a lot of the smaller communities really relish that and really like to have people getting together. And in reality, a lot of people never show up at town meeting. So it's a small percentage of the people there that are voting on the budget or voting on different initiatives that the rest of the people aren't weighing in. So it's always a question of how do you engage people to get them to town meeting. Now, if you talked about it like a dog leash ordinance, you would get everybody at town meeting immediately because people love their dogs, and if you're going to have something on the ballot, they would show up, but it's generally not on the ballot. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to going and spending time with folks at the information sessions in Reading, Plymouth, and Woodstock Saturday and also on Monday. Some towns in Vermont, they already had their session about 3 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, because also people can vote early voting. If they get an absentee ballot, they can vote up to 45 days before the actual town meeting. So they figured, well, if people are going to be voting, we better have an information session to tell them what's going on. So that'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to that. And on the ballot in 3 of the towns here is whether to move the town lister position to an appointed assessor position, which is different. Towns struggle to find someone who's willing and able to serve as a lister in this important work. But a lot of towns have struggled to fill those jobs, and so trying to change that to a different office type is an attempt to address that. So we'll see what that does. That failed in Woodstock, I think 2 years ago, maybe 1 year ago, and it's back on the ballot, and it's still on the ballot now in Plymouth and in Reading. So it's
Right. I was
trying
thinking
to
about
cross the
that, like
state.
what makes that such a hot issue this year? I think there's a lot of towns looking at this very same issue all at the same.
Yeah, part of it is the grand list is so central to funding education. So there's a lot of requirements that are placed on listers as to the training they should be getting, and so it's really a burden to find someone that's willing to put in the time to get the training. And so finding someone who has that time and might have that acumen. So those don't always line up. And right now, as an elected position, somebody could be elected to that job who doesn't have either the time or the training. And then sometimes folks get into it and realize it's not for them. I mean, Reading is very fortunate to have John Fike, a person who's been doing his job as lister for years, and he is actually certified as an appraiser. and that's highly unusual for other towns. I mean, Reading is very lucky to have someone like John who goes and makes a point of visiting construction sites several times during the construction period, doing periodic updates based on the sales of properties and everything else. So their grand list is in great shape. But other towns, I mean, I think 129 towns have scheduled reappraisals, and they're in Vermont. And the one that's the latest date is 2030. So it's like, wow, we're 5 years out. So there are another 29 towns, I think that's the right number, that still have to get reappraisals. So the earliest they can actually get started is 2030 because there are only so many firms that can do this work.
Oh, I didn't realize. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So it's a big issue. I mean, it's big because also the rising property values have thrown the grand list totally off. That's why there's these common level of appraisals of like 50%, 60%, so that you know your assessment when you look at it, say it's a $200,000 house, you know the market value is 400. Like, wow, so there's some great inequities in that because not every property appreciates the same way. So it's a blunt instrument, the CLA, that's used to really adjust those values. So it's it is an issue, and I think it's increasingly difficult for towns to find those folks that can do that work on a regular basis.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that'll be an exciting topic at town meeting.
Yeah, it sure will. And
Yeah,
so I guess I will see. I'll be at the Reading one. We're live broadcasting and streaming that one on Saturday morning.
awesome. Yep,
And we're also covering Plymouth, so we'll see you out there. And then I know Woodstock TV will be out at the Woodstock one. So
great.
yeah, it's always a busy time for us, but we want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to update us on a weekly basis throughout the session. I know next week we'll have Tom Ayers from the Vermont Standard back, who'll be patching in all the way from the Azores. So yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
So once again, with State Representative Charlie Kimbell, I'm going to sign off. This is Patrick Cody with Okemo Valley TV, and thanks for tuning in.